The Mortal Kombat IP was seriously waning in the late 90s after the release of its fourth entry, Defenders of the Realm, a failed cartoon based on the series, only lasted 4 months. Annihilation, the sequel to the successful 1995 original, flopped in theaters. Conquest, a live-action WB series, canceled after 1 season despite strong ratings. MK Mythologies, a failed port of MK4 and Gold, Advance, and Special Forces were all games that also met similar levels of failure and even infamy. The latter 2 games served as a breaking point over at Midway, resulting in the resignation of several of its staff, which included the series co-creator John Tobias. The mediocre products and general overexposure led to the MK brand going on a 2-year hiatus. The freeze of the series was even longer if you consider the time between the mainline games, that ended up being 5 years. During that 2-year gap away from the Mortal Kombat series, Midway released The Grid in 2000. After that, the company felt like they were finally ready to return to MK and give it another go with a fresh set of ideas and a desire to reinvent the franchise. To accomplish that, the team started making this new game completely from scratch. Gaming had underwent a critical change since the release of Mortal Kombat 4. The already diminishing interest in the arcade scene at the time of that game's release evolved into a complete shift to home consoles. With this knowledge, Midway walked away from the arcade business, which means the initial plans to release an arcade version of the title was quickly cancelled, making The Grid the company's final arcade release. This decision was made so they can provide a more content-rich single-player experience. Mortal Kombat 5 was announced during E3 in 2001, with a trailer that didn't show any footage of the game outside of very quick flashes of Scorpion and Jax. Midway shared the idea of just naming the title Mortal Kombat to further emphasize the importance of the series' fresh start. After a long period of rumor and speculation, the official title of the game was revealed in January the following year. Mortal Kombat: Deadly Alliance was planned to release in the fall of 2002, but was delayed a couple of months to give the devs more time to work on the game. Deadly Alliance released in November of 2002 to generally favorable reviews from both critics and fans. Unlike its follow-ups with Deception and Armageddon, we here at TCB don't have too much nostalgia for the first entry in Mortal Kombat's 3D era. I vaguely remember it being a blockbuster weekend rental game, so imagine our shock of deciding to play this on a whim and getting so hooked that we unintentionally missed out on the second Fatal Fury beta. This is Team Crossbody, and this is Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance's Runback. Deadly Alliance is a direct sequel to Mortal Kombat 4. We covered that game way back during the first season of the Runback. Check it out, it's rough but it needs some love. The story has past villains Shang Tsung and Quan Chi forming a team in the scheme together of the souls of the most powerful warriors in order to revive an ancient, seemingly invincible army to control Outworld, then eventually Earthrealm. Wanting to help, Raiden forfeits his position as Elder God and returns to Earth to gather fighters to combat his incoming danger. All this, mind you, is told through a tight, almost 4-minute introductory cutscene that is filled with so much intrigue and gravitas that it becomes the hallmark of the 3D era games going forward. I remember these openings being a particularly big deal whenever a new MK game was released when I was a kid. Now that I'm thinking about it, these little short films could tell a more cohesive story than the modern MK games could do a more than quadruple that runtime. That's really super sad. Anyway, after defeating the literal god who may or may not needed the powers of an amulet. The amulet! No! Wait a minute. Who the fuck defeated Shinnok anyway? Was it Liu Kang? I'm assuming it was Liu Kang. How does 2 previously defeated right-hand men raise the stakes? Well, in one of the most arguably shocking moments in gaming history, Shang Tsung and Quan Chi pimps over the Earthrealm, find Liu Kang, double team the man and murder him. It's just one of those days. A strategy I'm surprised that hasn't happened before. I need to put emphasis on the importance of this. Liu Kang is the hero of Mortal Kombat and was a key protector of Earthrealm, not to diminish the other defenders' actions, but Liu was most certainly that guy, defeating all the major threats the Earth has encountered. This easily establishes the sorcerers as the biggest threat to the story up to this point, and without any silly DBZ-ish power creeping. And it was simply by just removing Earthrealm's pitch header.
assuming they fought Raiden would remain at Elder God status. Oh, they also killed Shao Kahn too, but he already lost twice, so who cares? King's death is not only used as a harsh separation from the MK arcade era and ushering in this new 3D one, but it also puts Deadly Alliance in a pretty unique spot for the series, as this is the first entry not to have a traditional protagonist. It's an odd choice to take, and I've always had a strange feeling about it for some reason. I've always enjoyed the idea of not having a central character tied to the main events of the game, and therefore predetermined to defeat the main thread of the story. For me, it made the characters that did appear in the game stand out a whole lot, and made the world that much more interesting for getting invested in the lore. Like I said, it's a strange feeling. Speaking of lore, let's talk about the characters' bios real quick. A really unique thing that I enjoy about Deadly Alliance and its follow-up Deception is that each character has two bios, which is really just one bio split up into two parts associated with a render of the character's in-game costume. It's a really neat way to squeeze in more lore for each character. But in the case of some of these guys, more specifically the veterans, some which haven't been seen for a game or two, an additional bio isn't going to cut it. And this is where the main single player mode for Deadly Alliance come in, Conquest. Before becoming a full-on adventure mode, Conquest was used as kind of a tutorial, have you play an assortment of 10 missions per character, each being accompanied with historical backgrounds about their fighting style or weapons, but also personal backgrounds of the fighters, along with stories what each one been up to prior to the game's events. Even more information about the story can be proof in the special crit renders, which is artwork used to expand on the lore of the entire series. It's a ton of reading for sure, but it's super rewarding and helps flesh out the MK universe tremendously, with all kinds of new rounds, factions, and backstories. On top of that, once you're done brushing up on the past, there's also the standard arcade mode endings to see where some of these guys end up, although most are non-canon. Deadly Alliance marks the period where additional game modes were becoming a priority. While not at the point of having in-depth alternative game modes like its two sequels, there is an attempt to add variety outside of the standard Ali animated 10-frame dick punch. Test Your Might comes back from MK1, and it makes it more complex with different, more difficult objects to break. Alongside of returning Test Your Might is a new spin-off game, Test Your Sight, where you play a shell game that can be made more difficult with more cups and increased speeds. Both of these games can show up randomly before matches in versus mode as well. And yeah, they may not be much, but they were needed to help Midway see where they wanted to go when adding variety to their games going forward. The most standout game mode Deadly Alliance is known for has to be the Crypt, wherein game coins can be spent to unlock tons of things, from character bios, concept art, costumes, to bits of lore. And with over 600 coffins to open, with the limited game modes DA has to offer, getting everything can take a long time, with both Deception and Armageddon refining and expanding off the idea to make the grind a little less tedious with the introduction of those aforementioned additional game modes and online play. The Crypt left so much of an impact with both fans and Midway that it eventually became something of a secondary single player adventure mode in MKX and 11.
The roster for Deadly Alliance isn't anything spectacular and can shockingly be called fairly pedestrian when taking the massive amounts of bold moves this entry took with its storytelling and gameplay into consideration. Despite the objective of wanting to provide something fresh, the roster consists mostly of returning characters everyone would be expecting, Liu Kang aside. While this had become something of a problem for the series during the Inner West era of the franchise, especially around the time of MK11's release, the context is different. The Inner West line of MK games were highly successful, so I feel they could get away with changing the roster up more, especially after how many new fighters were introduced in MKX. So it just felt kinda lazy to omit almost all those guys and just give us the MKX roster with some more older characters thrown in. With Mortal Kombat during this time, however, as said in the top of the video, the series was floundering for the better part of the 90s, and after going radio silent for 2 years, Deadly Alliance stood as the big resurgence for the franchise, looking to win back fans who might have become disillusioned with the brand during said floundering. As such, bringing back all the fan favorites was an obvious decision in mending that wound. Plus, with all the changes made to shake up the series, Having a lot of familiar elements was critical as not to alienate people in such a way the Street Fighter 3 line of games did, or Mortal Kombat 1. Also, with the rebooted gameplay, returning players will be interested in how the legacy members of the cast will play in this new style. So adding in as much favorites as possible was probably the better move. That's not to say they were completely reliant on returning characters, because out of the 24 total, 11 of them were brand new. And I know a lot of these guys outside of Kenshi gets a ton of shit flung their way for not being as good as the OG characters or something, but a lot of these guys are cool, and that can be seen with how intertwined and interesting most of their stories are. I would love to get into it, but I've spent enough time on this subject. Just remember, in order to prevent shitty rosters that bore you to tears like the ones in Street Fighter 6, are ones that are so scared to add new characters that they just switch around roles of legacy members that ultimately makes them even more unrecognizable. Mortal Kombat 1, you guys are going to have to accept new characters in these games eventually. One of the interesting things that stuck out to me while playing Deadly Alliance were the arenas, which might be the only game in the series not to have any returning from past games. I'm sure that would have been easy to do. After all, MK4 did bring Goro's Lair and the Living Forest into 3D, and every other entry would include them, with the NRS era at least having one, so it's not like it couldn't have been done. I would have to assume this was another attempt to further emphasize that DA was doing his own thing in certain areas, and I respect him for that decision, because every arena in this game is pretty sick. I remember having the opinion that the 3D era, specifically Deception and Armageddon, housed some of the best stages in fighting games, and would have assumed that that take wouldn't have extended to Deadly Alliance, since the offerings here don't sport the same interactions and gimmicks those games have. And while it is true that these stages are simple comparatively, I really do enjoy fighting in these arenas just as much, like more than a lot of modern games. I don't know what it is about them, and it's a little hard to explain because other fighting games, especially in the 3D area, does the same thing this game does. So what gives? Well, the reasoning might be a little messy, but walk with me here. You know when you hear about particular stories and some people might say that whatever setting that story takes place in is also a character? I guess it's a little like that. Each arena feels extremely lived in and have the exact amount of detail as not to feel over-designed or too much like a game stage. They feel like tangible areas in the world of Mortal Kombat, and the fighters just blend in so well with them. You look at something obvious like the Midway arena and I feel like, yeah, Sub and Frost belong here. But at the same time, characters like Dotora clashes with that environment, but still fits. And that's for every character. Each arena being accompanied by its own piece of lore really helps flesh out these areas as well. Midway crafted some pretty cool looking areas, sporting some extremely distinctive settings from one another. The Dragonfly arena will have you fighting on top of a huge outworld transportation vehicle as it speeds across the sky, which is just cool with the wind bellowing and the vast amount of mountainous terrain in the background. It's cool to know that there were other methods of traveling outworld outside of things like portals and sorcery. The Nether ship is another amazing one, fighting on top of the very same ship that carried warriors from Earthrealm to Shang Tsung's island and outworld for the first Mortal Kombat tournament. Nowadays, it's just a cargo ship he uses to transport the mummified army. The rough waves crashing against the ship along with the heavy rain just help elevate the mood of a match. The Palace Grounds is the base of operations for the Deadly Alliance that was built by Li Mei's people, the Sundu, under threat of death. Even this pretty basic looking arena is put over the top by the various amounts of screaming souls that passes you by as you fight, being sucked into the massive tornado at the center of the palace, which just bathes that area in an eerie green fog. Despite the aged graphics, I still find all these arenas look pretty good. Quickly going back to the lore for a second, thanks to the little background these areas are given, you never really have to guess why two characters are fighting in a random versus match for any reason for the most part because of the fleshed out world building. Not saying you have to have a reason to have two characters fight, I'm just saying it can be explained, and I think that's pretty damn cool.
Hey, hold on to your seats!
based on societies.
Well, good thing I'm fun to have around then.
Yes, it's a very good thing. I expect a number of horrible deaths tonight.
I'm guessing that dress will cause a few of them.
You've been gone a long time, Kagan. I've been taking care of your family for you, though. One at a time, all across the world for 70 years. I think I'm nearly done. What do you think of me now, Father?
In the sea of many bold steps Midway took in so far with Deadly Alliance, obviously the shift into a fully committed 3D fighting engine was the biggest. Building upon the occasional use of stage depth in MK4, a game that had limited shifting into the fore and background, that had so much 2D gameplay that it ended up falling somewhere in the middle of it all. And with that being said, let me have a little mini rant. MK4 and others like it that has limited interaction of its y-axis is my definition of a 2D.5 fighter. A 2D.5 fighter does not mean a 2D game with 3D graphics. That's always been a little silly to me. The NRS games are 2D fighting games. I've always heard this misconception all my life, and I thought I might as well state that here. The point I'm trying to make is Deadly Alliance is the first Mortal Kombat with complete control over 3D movement. You can still jump by pressing the inward diagonal buttons, which still make jumping attacks possible, but it's only forward, as jumping backwards is only used for mobility. Oh, another quick aside. Deadly Alliance is, to my knowledge, the first to ever use what would be considered the modern day number pad input notation method that uses 1 and 2 as your punches and 3 and 4 as your kicks. But with that covered, let's just do the rest of the controls while we're here. Outside of the attacking buttons, L1 allows you to cycle through your stances, R1 uses stance specific moves, and R2 is block. Another crucial first for the series that Midway picked up from Virtua Fighter and Tekken is characters possessing the older stake strings. This helped differentiate the roster further and add more depth to the character's overall game plan. Up until this point, every character shared the same normals and strings. This particular change will remain to the series till this day. Strings can vary in length and some can be pretty long, and they even evolve changing stances more than once. Outside of learning juggles, these serves are some of the highest basic damaging options in the game. Combine this with some juggles and damage can easily land somewhere in the area of over 30 to 40%.
On that note, Deadly Alliance introduces styles or stances as its main mechanic. Every character has 3 styles each, 2 hand-to-hand and 1 based around a weapon. Each stance has its own collection of different normals and strings to use, with weapons dealing more damage and having the ability not to be parried. But as a trade-off, you will take significantly more damage while using them. Stances are used in a variety of different ways. Some stances might have safer mids, while others might have weaker lows but offer stronger movement options. Weapons can vary from character to character, providing ones like Raiden with additional range, while Sonya's weapon will assist in her already deadly close range game. The weapons each fighter has does a pretty good job synergizing well with the respective character's kit. While I won't say every fighting style is useful, you can find 1 or 2 usable attacks if you want to focus on just one. Some stances definitely outshine others. For example, all of Kung Lao's work well from one another with nothing feeling too weak, while Sonya's best twos undoubtedly comes from her Twican Do stance that gives her access to a powerful mix-up game, where Quan Chi's broadswords might net him the best results outside of a pretty fast jab in Tang Song Do, but on average, most fighting styles are generally well designed. Within a character's 3 stances are what the game calls special moves, but I believe the generally accepted term for them are stance moves. These are unique actions that can only be used while using a specific stance. A good amount of these are copied and pasted across the roster, so for example, let's go over the more common ones. In certain styles, a character could possess a power-up. A power-up adds drastic damage to all your attacks, throws, and specials for a short period of time. However, the more time that elapses during the power-up window, the less the added damage does until the move returns to their normal damage values. Since the character strikes a pose before powering up, it's not best to use while your opponent is active, unless you can guarantee a hit within that short time window. Characters with stunning moves such as Sonya can take advantage of these pretty easily. Some weapon styles allow the user to impale the opponent with their weapon, either by stabbing or throwing them. When impaled, there will be continued damage over the course of a round. Certain styles have access to a powerful technique called reversal. A reversal will counter any move that's not a projectile, weapon, or a throw. They also catch the opponent regardless of hit level, and once they land, it's guaranteed certain attacks and branches. Much like power-ups, taunts will have your character perform a pose that will replenish a small amount of life. However, each time it is used, there is diminishing returns as you will gain less and less. Such as with anything, some stance moves are clearly better than others, and in nice little ways some of the same moves differ, like with the impels, keep things feeling a little more unique. Stance moves are a cool way to add variety to the fighting and is a good addition to the overall gameplay.
I remember the gameplay felt in the other games of the 3D era being a lot more crazy, and I was shocked with how reserved the general pace of Deadly Allaince is. And you would think that would make for a more boring game, but no. After playing a bunch of the modern day fighters with their shitty guess heavy gameplay and their every form of neutral skip, I was really jonesing for a solid boots to the ground footsies based fighter, and decided to make this video when this game ended up scratching that itch. The fighting style system is fun. The movement and pace of the game is shockingly quick and addicting. Mix-ups come fast, and while I wouldn't call DA a combo heavy game, they're satisfying when they do land. Speaking of combos, I like the fact that unlike later games, there are no combo breakers. It's not like it's a bad mechanic or anything, but sometimes it's nice to be responsible for your own misplays that leads you getting comboed. And since the game is so fast, they don't last very long, they aren't pace breaking. All things considered, I believe the gameplay to DA to be fantastic. And it's hard to believe that this is their first shot at a 3D fighter. Is it Tekken? No, but does it need to be? I guess it depends how you feel about Tekken 4. Sure, it can be janky, and you might find some easy infinites to abuse. Hitboxes might have a monitor on sometimes. Strange visual and audio glitches might pop up on occasion. And I'm sure not being able to throw blocking opponents is some kind of oversight and not a mechanical decision made on the dev's part. But who knows? It just might be. It's Midway, baby. The last thing to cover about the game are the Fatalities, and I'm just gonna level with y'all. We've never been a fan of them. They were never the element that drew us into the series. That was more of the story, characters, and the fun gameplay. Don't get us wrong, when they were more comical and fun, doing Fatals was an interesting thing to do every now and again. But during the MKX and 11 timelines, where they were becoming longer and more serious and the brutality was more realistic and the tone was darker, at that point we were all for NRS removing Fatalities from the series entirely. If it meant the extra dev time would go towards polishing the fighting system or making a story that didn't make me hate the series. Deadly Alliance's offerings are mixed. For the first time since Mortal Kombat 1, the one with the digitized sprites, each character only has one fatality to perform, and this makes the bad ones stand out. And there are indeed a good amount of stinkers, and not for the obvious reasons like the Quan neck stretch, because I quite like that one for how weird it is, but more because of how awkward and stiff the animations for them are. I don't want to rag on Midway too hard, considering that this was their second game with the render-rare engine. I'm not saying the criticism lobbied against them aren't justified, just that it wasn't for the lack of trying. Well, Looney Maids is pretty fucking lazy, but there's a couple of noteworthy ones too. Scorpion using his spear doing his is pretty cool. Kenshi breaking bones with his telekinesis is tight. Raiden's is pretty neat for a typical lift up and electrocute a guy finisher, and Katana's is about on par with Quan Chi's, but with added Jake. But outside of those, a lot of them are really lame. Oh, I almost forgot. Every character gets one more stance when it's time to finish them, and that's the Fatality stance.
which does away with that dumb distance requirement needed to perform them because the camera can just cut and place the characters where they need to be. Something the newer games still haven't adopted yet, even with all the fancy technology gained since the 6th generation of consoles. So, good job, NRS. You can animate every rib on the human skeleton, but you can't do a simple camera cut for a fatality. Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance had a lot to prove after a very rough patch, and could have easily been the last game of the franchise if mishandled. But it ended up being way more thought out than I ever would give it credit for, considering this is Midway's first attempt at a 3D fighter for the series. The shockingly fluid gameplay and visuals absolutely still holds up today. A common complaint weighed against it, however, is that in the transition to 3D, the series lost some of its magic. While we never grew up with the classic era, I kinda get what they mean in retrospect, knowing what I know about the franchise now. A lack of special moves in both recognizability as well as amount, a mixed bag of fatalities, and not having any returning classic arenas unless the nethership counts. I can understand a whole lot of people returning to the series feeling like this is a little less MK, but I think those are some light paper cuts in an overall really fun game. I really meant it that the gameplay hooked us for the past 3 weeks or so, to the point that we even missed out on the second Fatal Fury beta. I think the game is that good, and I believe I can speak for the both of us here at TCB and say that Deadly Alliance might be our new favorite Mortal Kombat game. But I suppose we should wait until we get reacquainted with Deception and Armageddon to see how those two games hold up before making that claim. We'll see you next time on the Runback.